Good
Okay.
afternoon. My name is Shelby Johnson, and I serve as the Geographic Information Officer for the state of Arkansas. I participate in the National States Geographic Information Council, and this is one in a series of GIS 101 recordings, and this one is a focus on redistricting. Redistricting is a process that rolls around once every decade following our decennial census of population in the United States. Following that census population, the numbers are issued out to the states, and at the state and local level, many of the jurisdictions that form the election geography in our democracy are redrawn or reapportioned, or also called redistricting, to ensure that we have equal representation of population. The process lends itself to being performed by geographic information systems because most of the data is tied to maps. Maps of cities, counties, states, and other sub-electoral districts like school districts, voting districts, state house districts, state senate districts, and so forth. The GIS processes use a combination of the population data and other demographic data to be able to assign population so that each district is drawn substantially equal. What I've shown here on this screen is an example of the congressional districts of Arkansas, and I have an example plan. The example plan shows the first, second, third, and fourth districts of Arkansas and the population of each of those numbers. What GIS allows us to do very quickly is to estimate how close the total population is to the target. If we were going to have a target population ideal for every district in Arkansas using this data, we would need 720,980 persons in every district. In this example plan, the second congressional district is 10,000 population below the target. The first district is 538 persons above the target. The fourth district is 11,703 persons above the target. Because the fourth district and the second district are close but not on target, we need to swap population from one district to another. Normally, if you were only using tabular information or paper maps, this would be a difficult process. But with geographic information systems, the user can simply select a district and then choose a county that assigns the population then to the correct district. And now our population is more adjusted. The second congressional district in this sample plan is now only 186 persons below the target. And the fourth congressional district for this example is only 1,258 persons above the target. Redistricting can be performed at a number of different levels, and I've just shown this example here at the state level to be able to quickly illustrate how fast GIS can perform these calculations using the software and the underlying data. This is a good example of how geographic information systems, technology, and data can support our democracy in the redistricting process. I'll stop now and ask if there's any questions.
Hi, this is Bridget. I'm wondering who builds the data for redistricting?
The redistricting data is built by a number of different players, and it's based off of the levels of geography. So for example, if you were looking at a city boundary or a municipality, often the municipalities create the boundary of their city through the annexation process, and then that information is rolled up to the U.S. Census Bureau. At the state level, it could be a state entity such as a Secretary of State or election directors. It could also be state GIS offices that play a role in facilitating the creation of the boundary data, such as cities, school districts, counties, other local districts, and then that information is rolled up to the national level where it's assembled by the U.S. Census Bureau. The answer really is it depends on the level of geography.
Okay. Can you even do redistricting without GIS?
You could, but it would be really hard. And it would be particularly hard in a jurisdiction where you're trying to cross multiple levels. And let me use an example. Senate districts at a state level would be very complicated to do using tabular information and paper maps. In a typical state, a Senate district is going to span multiple counties. And because each Senate district needs to be roughly equal in population, it would be very likely that each Senate district would be made up of one or more counties, and in some cases, it would split multiple counties. Splitting those multiple counties using just a tabular list of information could be done, but it would be extremely difficult. GIS makes it possible with a few clicks of a button.
Yeah. How long have we been using the GIS in the United States over the tabular and paper maps? Do you know?
Some of the earliest redistricting GIS applications were done in the 1990s decade, but there were only a few. There were, in the 2000 decade, a few more, and they really came into their own in the 2010 decade. Software and data, as well as computing horsepower, had matured. And in the 2010 decade, we saw a lot of redistricting that was performed by GIS. In fact, I would wager the majority of redistricting at all levels of government was done using GIS technologies. It's likely that in this next decade, the 2020 decade, almost all redistricting will be done entirely using GIS technology.
And who usually does redistricting?
Redistricting is done at a number of different levels. In the Congress, the Congress is redistricted typically by state legislatures, although that's not always the case. Typically, the state House and state Senate districts in the state are redrawn or redistricted by anywhere from the legislatures themselves to the redistricting commissions or redistricting boards. In a few places, there are other means by which the redistricting is done. And then at the lower levels of election geography, you have redistricting performed by cities, counties, school districts for their school board zones, for example. So redistricting happens at nearly all levels of government.
Okay. What is the schedule for redistricting?
Well, the first thing that must take place is the census count in April of 2020. That's when Census Day happens and the enumeration of population takes place. It takes quite a bit of time for the census to accomplish that huge mission. And after they've done that, it takes them a bit of time to assemble all the data. The data typically will roll out in February of the year after the census. And so we would expect to see redistricting data from the United States Census in early 2021. And at that point in time, the Congress would begin to be reapportioned, and then all of the other election districts would begin to be redistricted. Those are done in roughly 2021, and you could have some that might take even on into the next year of 2022. Most of them would be done in 2021.
Okay. Those are all my questions. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if maybe Bronwyn or Molly have any questions for you at this time.
This is Karen, and I have a question.
Or Karen.
So the variety of data that you described that can be used in redistricting, does it all have to be in the census database? I mean, is it like any roads that are used or any other boundary?
The foundation layer that almost all redistricting is built off of is nested in the census data and known as the census block. The block file is the lowest level of geography that stores the population. And so in an example where you're assigning population to be roughly equal for a municipality, you would do that ward assignment at block by block. Same goes for county level jurisdictions or school districts, for example. Those block data are foundational to the redistricting process, but also included in the census block data are other physical features that are used to make up the blocks. Those can include rivers, lakes, streams, reservoirs, roads, railroads, interstates, and other administrative boundaries. Most of the data that you need in order to tackle redistricting is nested in that census data. There could be a rare occasion where you might need some other data from some other local source. However, it's probably pretty rare that you would use data from another source because it doesn't have the block and population assignment that you need to run the math to ensure that each district is roughly equal in population.
So to follow up on that, somebody couldn't just use an arbitrary line to divide a block to divvy up population?
It's technically possible that you could, and a good example of that would be an example where a municipality conducted an annexation of new territory after the block boundary was formed. That doesn't happen often, but it can happen. And in this case, the local authorities who are performing the redistricting would want to use that new municipal boundary in their redistricting process. In that case, you would perform a technique which is called splitting a block, and there are some math and a process and procedure for doing that. Those occasions are pretty rare.
So I have two more questions. What type of metadata is done to document the thought process behind redistricting?
Really, in redistricting, the biggest thing associated with the data has more to do with the voting age population, the total population, and then the demographics and race data associated with the redistricting plan. In those terms, what you would want to see, for example, in a redistricting plan is a common community of interest. Communities being compact are ideal scenarios in redistricting. And in that case, when you have a community of a common race and you can create a district from that for that community, it gives them an opportunity to elect a representative that represents their community. Other kinds of metadata would be items specific to the redistricting authority process. So, for example, the names and members of the election commission or the authority that adopts the plan, community meetings surrounding the plan, when the plans were adopted, a legal description of the plan so that the election authorities can then assign voters to the new redistricted area. And then, of course, just the GIS information that went into it, such as the census blocks, for example.
Okay, and my second question is, if you can give us more information about this tool that you're using now, this Esri redistricting tool, is that available to everyone?
I use this particular tool because it is a new tool that is available from Esri. does the redistricting process online, and it may become a tool that is used by people who want to be able to share redistricting plans online to allow others to be able to see a draft redistricting plan, to be able to provide that to citizens or others who want to be able to view that plan. Quite often these plans in the past have been developed, but the public always doesn't have time in their work schedule or daily routine to be able to attend the public hearings and provide their input. This particular tool would allow them to do that online because they could share the plan and the draft plan online, for example. This tool is available now, and there are a few other tools that are out there that perform the redistricting process that have online capabilities. I just happen to use this particular tool because it's one I'm familiar with.
That makes me wonder if, like, how up to date is this tool? So I watched you added that one county into District 2. How up to date are those numbers where that is how many target people you are above or over your total?
So this data, I didn't say that earlier, and I'm glad that you asked that question. The data that I'm using for these numbers is from the 2010 census. So these numbers are actually quite old. I can't use the new numbers because they haven't been created yet. Once redistricting, once the census takes place, those numbers are at full stop. They never change again. The numbers published for those blocks are what they are. And the only way they would ever change is if a community conducted a special census or you have the next census in 2030. So these numbers, in effect, become sacrosanct for a decade.
Wow. And that seems like that could lead to some issues.
Well, there's always going to be population growth that would occur in between the decades, and population moves here and there. And so I can only speculate about how our leaders who formed up the reapportionment and redistricting process thought about that in terms of actual process for conducting the census and redistricting. And I speculate that they settled on once every decade because it would allow everyone to have enough time to be able to complete the entire process.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. All right. Any more questions?
One final one. Is there a deadline by which states have to have all that work done following the census, like by the end of, in this case, the end of 2021?
Most states have in their state laws deadlines, and those deadlines are typically driven by their next election cycle. So, for example, if you had in your state laws that you would hold elections in the fall of odd-numbered years, that would mean that local and state authorities would have to have the redistricting process completed in summer of 2021 in order to allow the election officials to assign voters to the correct precincts for a fall election of 2021. I can't tell you that that's specifically how it works in every state, but typically the real deadline is driven by the next election cycle following the census year.
That makes sense. Thanks.
All right.
Okay.
Those
are
all
there any other questions?
Oh, I think that's it. Thank you so much for your time and explaining all of this to us and kicking off our GIS 101 sessions. We're going to make this available to our entire membership, and we look forward to other topics in the future. But thank you so much for starting with redistricting.
Thanks a bunch.
Thanks, Shelby.
Yeah, thank you. Very insightful.
Thank you.
All right.